Okay, great. Thank you for setting this up. You can see that the model has been imported into the VE software. This is actually a separate program, though some pieces of it do sit inside of Affinity and can work without the VE in the background. You can actually bring it out into this analysis software. So I'm just going to go to an axonometric view. And you can see that there's some glazing on the model. And I'm just going to open the three-dimensional view of this. And you can see that the percentage glazing that we have applied to our model has been set on the center of the exterior walls. So this is a very quick way in Affinity and with IES to say, let me test 25% glazing, 30% glazing. Again, it's all about that quick iterative design when we're working at the early stages, and even when the design is developing. So I'm just going to close out this three-dimensional view. One of the things you'll also notice, if you have worked with other 3D models before, whether it's GBXML or other types of analysis software that does building performance, you'll see that there isn't as much of a problem with the transfer of geometry between Affinity and IES as there is with some other programs, because with the larger programs, sometimes it gets a little messy and a little bit complex. Okay, so we're going to look at VE-Gaia. There's really two sections in the virtual environment. There are the individual modules themselves, which have been used for over 16 years by engineers all over the world. And then there's these special navigators that we have. VE-Gaia is something that we developed specifically for architects and designers to get early feedback and to be part of that iterative design process. We want it to be quick. We want it to be used during your design because the biggest impacts on energy can often be seen at the earliest stages of design. And some of the tools that you'll see underneath here are actually available inside of Affinity. So some of the things that we looked at with climate or building metrics, and then also with the building heating and cooling loads. We also were able to compare our building in Affinity against the 2030 challenge, which is looking at different reduction levels depending on what year you're doing that analysis in. So there's quite a bit of features inside of the tool. But the difference when you move inside of the full virtual environment is that you can start customizing parameters about your building. So where you may have picked something like a brick block wall, you may want to start editing that. Other things that you can edit are the orientation of your building. So if I want to see what happens when I rotate my building by 15 degrees, what effect does that have on my analysis, or 30 degrees? So I'm always able to go in and make these changes and take that model a little bit further, but I've already done the majority of my geometry building inside of Affinity. Okay, so I can drop down to Gaia. Gaia, again, is the suite for designers, but I'm also going to scroll down and show you some of the other specialized tools that we have that you can use on your Affinity model. You'll see under rating systems, we have rating systems for different programs all over the world. And in the United States, of course, LEED is probably the most popular that you've heard of, and also sometimes BREEAM, as well as the 2030 challenge. So that it's going to compare your building's energy use against a survey of buildings of its type. So that's what these are looking at. So we're going to take a look today at the LEED Navigator, which will look at daylighting in this case, and some of the Gaia features. But again, we're only going to touch on a very small portion of what's available because this webinar would just take too long if we covered a lot of things. So I do encourage you to download the trial of this and certainly contact us at the email addresses that you'll see at the end of this presentation for information on how to go through this trial. Okay, so for the first one I'm going to pull up is going to be natural resources. And what natural resources is going to do, and I'm just going to pull up this, it's going to give me the ability to see if I had an analysis to run based on the inputs that I have set inside of Affinity, meaning that this is an office building. And when I assign office, there's other things that are assigned, like there are this many people per square foot. My occupancy is taken into account there. It takes into account the hours of operation. It's going to take into account the heating and cooling set points. And to make this part of your iterative design process, we want to do that automatically for you. Of course, you can always come in here and take that further. If your building is open a certain number of hours and you want to specify that, you certainly can. when you're just looking at building form, you really don't need to go into that detail because you want to compare apples against apples and say, okay, I have the same baseline settings, but then I'm running a comparison based on that. So here we have natural resources. We have a rainwater collection area. So we had 6,000 square feet per floor, which of course our upper floor is going to be a little bit less because it's using the remainder of our spaces. So I'm going to assume we have this amount of space to collect on rainwater, and I'm just going to hit OK. It's also going to ask me, do I want to apply this to a rating system? This doesn't mean that it has to be with that rating system, but it gives you a metric for comparison. And since I've already run an analysis, meaning previously before the session started, I ran my dynamic thermal simulation, which actually runs at every 10-minute time set to look at the analysis of this building. So when I open this up inside of natural resources, I can see a lot of information about how much my building is consuming. And again, at this early stage, it may not be that you know that this is going to be exactly what your building is going to consume in the end. But you are still able to compare 6,000 square feet per floor versus 5,000 versus 10 stories compared to 6 stories, so different types of plans and layouts. Or in this case, where you have a developed design, you're going to be able to compare that against other schematic designs that you may have come up with the design team. So here we're looking again at the energy consumption in the background. And for the top one, we're looking at photovoltaic resources. So the solar resource that's available, and then saying if we had, in this case, it's going to pick a PV type for you. So in this case, we have this type of solar panel, and we have a certain area. In this case, we have about a 10,000 square foot PV array. So this is quite large, of course. But for this climate, we start to look at and see, all right, based on our building consumption, this is how much we could offset that consumption with this size of PV array. And this is a very large PV array. So we may decide that this option for the site may not be the best option. The other thing we look at is the annual wind resource, and that's what's shown in the blue here. And in the background, again, is our annual electrical consumption. Then it shows what wind turbine was chosen and how that would compare as well. So if we have the same budget to spend on both of these options, we could see that a wind turbine would be more effective at reducing our electrical consumption. And finally, we have our rainfall, where we specified our collection area. We can see how much that's being offset by the annual rainfall, but also not just annual rainfall, but in relation to our exact building use and a coefficient. So what type of roof did we specify in here? In this case, it's looking at it for you. When we go into a later type of analysis, I'm just going to check down to my low and zero carbon technologies and open this up. I can then run the same analysis, but then start to specify with more detail. So I'll say that I know we can afford 2,000 square feet of polycrystalline solar panels versus 2 of these type of wind turbines of 5-meter diameter. So this gives me the ability to look for suggestions at first, but then further in design really compare specific technologies. So I'll just cancel out of this. So now I'm going to move into the daylighting option. And we have daylighting under both Gaia and also under our rating system. So let's open one of the rating systems for interest here. So the first thing I do is select my rating system. We have the most current versions for new construction and major renovations, core and shell, and schools, and we'll always have the preceding version. So that if you've started a project in one of the older versions, you can always take that further instead of IES, and you won't have to worry about adjusting things. I also can edit the spaces in my analysis. This is where it's very important that my room names came through from Affinity, because I want to know which spaces are regularly occupied and which spaces are not. For example, I don't have to have my hallways or corridors as part of my analysis, but the regularly occupied spaces, like my executive suites, will need to be part of this, so I'll just check those off. I can also come in and edit the visible transmittance of my glazing. So I'll pull up some of my glaze constructions. And right here is the one that's being used, but I have the ability to load in different types of glazing from our library or to just edit the visible transmittance here if I want. I can also edit, if I want to take it further, my wall construction. So I may want to test what happens if I have, for example, my insulation. What if I take that from 2 inches to 3 inches? Because many times you'll find that insulating the building more is more effective at reducing the energy consumption than adding a large PV array. So it's really about comparing all of these technologies and even just making the building more insulated and seeing what is the best ways to improve your building design. So I'm going to go into choose simple or advanced and penetrate. One of them has light penetration, which just means if you have interior glazing, you want to make sure that light is going to penetrate through the exterior all the way to the interior, but in this case we don't. So I'm just going to hit OK. And this is actually going to run through a yearly simulation, which again has been pre-run, so that will take a little bit longer, depending on the spaces and the complexity. And in this case we fail, which is kind of expected. We haven't necessarily optimized our glazing, but that's something we can do inside of IES, of course. But we're just looking for preliminary layouts at this point. So you could go back into Affinity, try 30%, try 35%, and start to see what happens very quickly. Here we have every run that we've done previously. We also include the credits, so 75% of spaces pass, and then also the innovation and design credits. And then we have every single floor that we've done. And everyone that's regularly occupied is part of our analysis here. So you can go through and then pull these images out if you need to use them. It also tells our information on the location and the stuff that you're going to need for submission. So once I've completed this, I can check it off. I can also open my information here to show who completed this step and when they completed it. I also have the option to add notes. So I need to say tried, let's say 80% visible transmittance, and then we could go back and try something different. So it's always good to be able to add notes, so for whoever you're working on the project with can go back and make those adjustments. And then for our final element that we're going to look at is back in Gaia. But again, all of these tools offer this quick iterative feedback that will help you with your design. So going into materials, again, I have the option to change my glazing, change my opaque constructions like my walls or my roof or these other details, ground varying surfaces, which means that if I have a portion of the wall that is above ground and below ground, I can set that all up. But again, with early stage design, I want to encourage architects and designers not to worry about being too consumed with the details. You're just comparing the big picture and saying this is 5% or 10% better than another option. Okay, so I'm going to simulate this out, and I'm just going to say that I've completed these steps. I can minimize this again to give myself more room, and I'll simulate this. Okay, one of the great things that we can see inside of materials is it'll tell us both weight and volume of every material that's used in the building. And when I open the core of these walls, that is where you are able to see, okay, there was brick, there was mineral fiber slab, there were these different elements in my wall. And all of that is now taken account for because we know even the smallest detail down to the density of the material. So we can do a takeoff of your building design and we'll say, okay, so brickwork, this type of brick, the inner leaf was this much volume of the building and this much in weight. And then the outer leaf was this much weight. So if anyone has ever worked on a LEED project, you know the detail that you have to go to when you look at recycled material and the weight and the volume. And it's often a heavy calculation to do. But if you fill this out correctly, then you can use all these takeoffs right from this list. The other thing it gives you are tips. So if your largest material is brick, this would probably be the one that you want to attack if you're looking at reducing or using more recycled content. So here we're going to say use reclaimed or local sources and try to avoid remotely sourced. Same with concrete. Hollow elements, recycled content, or precast is a good idea, and try to avoid these. So it's just giving you the heads up, as many architects are responsible for specifying this material, of different ideas that you could use in this case for this particular building. And on the right, we're always going to be able to see tips or tricks about what we could do to improve our design. So, for example, one of these comments is, additionally, some materials contain and or manufactured using substances which are toxic. PVC is an often quoted example. So it's just giving you the heads up that, all right, maybe this isn't on this list, but this could be something I was planning on using on a floor or on some of the casework in the building, and I want to try to avoid that here as well if I'm trying to look at a whole green building. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back to Melissa to wrap up the session. And again, feel free to pass any questions through the chat window, and we'll do these at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, let me back. Okay. So, as we've seen, Affinity+VE starts at the earliest stages with just the project program available. We can use the questionnaire to collect important information for VE analysis, which automatically loads into the Affinity properties. By generating a stacked building, we provide VE with some geometry at the early stage for more robust analysis. And then, with the program and stacked building in place, we can run climate review, building review, and energy index analyses to get some initial feedback about our program and the basic rectangular stacked building. The results then help to drive our additional program requirements or change those that we've set up earlier. We use the program requirements to guide our schematic design. And in the Affinity schematic design, we can run multiple scenarios of the building for comparison purposes to find the most optimal building form and adjust any project properties prior to moving into the detailed design. We can also rerun previous analyses like the ASHRAE loads, which gives us information on specific rooms. And finally, we can launch VE-Gaia directly from within Affinity for more detailed analysis like daylighting. Ultimately, Affinity+VE enables project teams to shift the sustainability analysis to the early stages of the building project, allowing you to include sustainability requirements in the project program and guide the design toward optimal sustainability. Affinity+VE integrates and automates these key processes, making it very easy for firms to ensure that the design meets the program and sustainability requirements as the design progresses, which also avoids costly rework that's otherwise common with later stage analysis when these specifications aren't considered from the start. As Michelle mentioned earlier, there's a wealth of data and functionality within each of our software tools, and it's impossible to cover everything in a single webinar session. So we do encourage you to get a trial copy of Affinity and VE so you can experience the benefits of the software firsthand. I will include our contact information on the last slide, and you can go ahead and just email us, and we will be able to get you a copy of the trial. Now, let's move on and review some of your questions. Okay, so one of the questions that I have here is, can you run these analyses multiple times? Yes, and that's something that I've mentioned from a couple times, but we haven't shown. What you can actually do is run these analyses, make changes to the program requirements within Affinity, make changes to the design and the schematic design, and then go ahead and rerun these analyses to see where you're at. Like I mentioned, we can also create a number of different scenarios, which helps you to run the analyses based on a couple of different building designs as well. But the nice thing about Affinity and IES is that you can actually be very flexible in terms of how you approach these projects. So this is really giving you an environment in which you can run a number of different scenarios and designs very quickly and easily, run analyses, go back, change requirements, run more analyses. So it's very flexible, even though we present it in more of a, A to Z sort of approach for webinar purposes. You can go back and forth at any time.
Yeah, I would also add to that is if you're working with a model, if you export your model again from Affinity and you've done some changes inside of IES, we actually have a tool that's called Model Merge, and that will apply whatever custom settings you've done to the re-imported building. So that's a good option as well. So it's entirely flexible and really made to fit inside of that option.
Yeah, perfect. That is something that's very similar between Affinity and VE is the flexibility. So that's definitely a huge benefit in terms of combining our software.
And the next question that I see as well is talk about how the program will be supported over time. Standard changes, LEAD version 3, for example, will be out fairly soon. Exactly. We are constantly updating this, and our tool is going to remain current with all standards. That means maybe we're talking a couple days after it comes out, but we work directly with the US GBC and other GBC organizations around the world to make sure that we have these updated standards and we're up to date with everything. So we're always changing it. A large part of our business in the US is mechanical engineers who do the 90.1 2007 ASHRAE analysis for the energy side of LEAD. So we cannot even miss by a couple days. We have to be there with all the latest versions. And that's something that IES is very dedicated to doing.
Perfect. Okay, I have one more here asking about whether you can adjust different parameters, for example, for wall construction on existing Affinity designs. Again, pointing to kind of the flexibility within Affinity, all of the properties and parameters that you see, especially when we opened up the building section, we have that kind of list of all of the properties where I showed you where the questionnaire loaded properties into Affinity. All of those are customizable, including actually the types of properties that you're seeing. So not just the values that you input, you can change those at any time and again run those analyses again, but you can actually customize what properties and parameters are located within Affinity as well. So if you have some custom items that you want to put in there, then you can definitely do that using our Affinity templates and whatnot. So again, this is pointing to there's a lot of functionality that's left to be explored within both Affinity and VE, and definitely within the integration between the two. So.
Yeah, and I would add to that is that at the earliest stages of analysis, you're basically going to say, I know this is a brick block wall that has an approximate R value of this. And to compare just, different stacked buildings, that's often fine because you don't even have the rooms laid out in the way that you want. But later in the project where you move to design development, which was the second model Melissa was showing, then you're going to know exactly what your building square footage is per floor, where the rooms are placed. That's when you want to worry about coming into the virtual environment and saying, okay, I know I have 3 inches of rigid insulation, and I want to test what happens when I put it in the core of the wall versus the outside face of the wall. And you can go that detailed. And so part of it would be the first step where we're doing just schematic. We would go in through Affinity. We would use the basic settings. We would run an analysis and make changes. Then later, we would take the information. If we re-exported something from Affinity, we could then use model merge to say, I created some custom constructions inside of VE. I want them applied to my new model. So it's very quick to do. It's just, where are you creating the data? Where do you want to do it? How detailed are you getting with your analysis? And it's really usually for architects, it's about the stage that you're at with the design.
Perfect. Okay. Do you have other questions on your end, Michelle?
Okay. Yep, I have a couple here. It says, when will IES and Affinity be available in the UK? If you are from the UK, I'm actually already in Europe, so the actual IES is the #1 analysis software in the UK right now for engineers. We do a lot of work with Part L, with the standards that you have to reach with BREEAM, which is, of course, much more important for people in the UK than LEED is. So it is currently available now, like today, and was available much longer in the UK than it has been in the United States. And that's where our headquarters is. The other one that I'm looking at will incorporate ASHRAE 189.1 green build design. It's right now because our software is related to being approved by ASHRAE 140, which is the test for analysis programs. We can be used for any of the ASHRAE codes. So yes, you could manually do that through the software if you're an engineer. The reason I say if you're an engineer, because if you're an architect, it might be a little bit harder for you to do, but you certainly could do it. I'm an architect and I know how to do a lot of this stuff. But what we've created are specialized navigators. So if you're an engineer and you work with 90.1 design, which 90.1 2007, you know that when you set up your different HVAC systems and you set up your different options, you have to apply very specifics to that. So we created a more automated way of doing it. So it is possible to do that through it, but it has to be kind of it's more manual than our navigators. But that being said, it's probably something that we'll do in the future. And as we're just adding these different navigators from around the world.
Okay. Perfect. I have a couple more here, but some of these are more tailored to their specific projects, so I'll go ahead and email you directly. Now, do you have anything else popping up on your side before we log off?
Okay, no, I mean, I think it was just a couple of really overview things. Of course, the design changes, which we spoke about, it's really flexible to go back and forth. Does IES work with Revit? Yes, both Affinity and IES work with Revit. So if you're bringing it from Affinity to Revit, then IES, or Affinity to IES, or Affinity resizing a Revit model back to Affinity to IES, all these things are possible. And you can look on our website for information about our Revit plugin. The other question I had was, do you have to buy the whole group of modules? You don't. You can also buy things that are just daylighting, for example, if you're only working on doing that portion of it. If you're not an architect and you don't want early stage tools, you just want to do electrical lighting design, you can certainly do that as well. And it's really based on specific packages. So you have the early portions that can come as part of VE-Gaia and what you're going to get inside of Trelligence Affinity. And then you could say, all right, well, I also want to offer daylighting in my office. So you could say, I want to add one more small piece of IES. So it's completely customizable to the needs of your firms, as the needs vary so greatly in the services that you offer. But I would encourage people that are doing this, especially designers, that for some of the lead credits you have to fulfill, if you're doing these 3D models with Affinity, with Revit, you have the ability to not outsource some of that and actually do that in-house. So take advantage of the models that you're doing. And I think that wraps up the questions I have, Melissa.
Okay. I actually see a couple more that just popped up. Someone's asking about, okay, so you just touched on the connection between ArchiCAD and Revit. I have a question about net versus gross square foot. We can incorporate both of those. There was someone asking about whether they saw that net square footage was in the reports. Again, our reports are completely customizable. We have a number of different properties. Those were just showing very specific properties. So yes, you can have net and gross square footage reflected in those. I also have a question about videos for the trial version. We do have videos online. I know you at IES have just redone your website. Are your videos available on there as well?
Yeah, you can go and check out, if you can get on at work, YouTube /IES-VE, just like down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Okay. You can go to our website as well. We have lots of information, lots of resources, all about just figure out, are you going in the section of being an architect, a designer, an engineer, and if all else fails, directly just email sales, because everyone has a very custom package, and the pricing can vary so much, and it's really worth just going in and saying, this is what we do, what should I have? And that's a very quick way to do it, instead of if you get frustrated picking up all the different pieces of it.
Yeah, we do a lot of those as well. If you have any questions, we have Affinity desktop Affinity+VE, we have Affinity for Revit and Affinity for ArchiCAD, so there's a couple different versions. And you can definitely just give us a call, let us know what you're working on, and we can kind of customize something for you. We do have videos on our website. I believe, actually, we have a very brief overview of Affinity+VE. That the link should be on the home page. We also have a YouTube channel as well. But I believe all of our videos are the same on our website and YouTube. The overview video is a really good way of kind of getting the broad concept of Affinity+VE, and it might be good for if you have any of your colleagues who couldn't make it here today. Obviously, we'll have this recording available, but if you want to just kind of introduce the idea to some of your project team members and see what they think, then you can go ahead and run that. It's like a 10-minute video, so you can just kind of give them a general idea of what we're working with. And I think that wraps up the questions. There are, like I said, a couple more that are a little more specific, so we'll go ahead and address those via email. So that's it. I think at this point you can take a look at our email addresses here on the bottom. Feel free to contact either us or Michelle at IES. They're both sales@trelligence.com and sales@iesve.com, and that's a good way of reaching us to set up a trial version of both of the softwares. And like I said, we will have a recording available, and we'll send a follow-up email with a link to view that recording as well. So thank you so much to Michelle for joining me today, and also to all of you. We are really excited about Affinity+VE, and we're very happy to see all of the enthusiasm that we've been receiving from people. And we'd like to thank you all for attending today.